It's just very hard to know what to do, really, when you're surrounded by a society that has become allergic to honest examination of fundamental problems. The reasons for that are numerous, but all kind of part of the same problem, which is what Phil would have described as the black iron prison, what I call the blood pyramid. It can be observed in your life and in the lives of people you know and love and hate, and just in history, if you look at it, that things can go very, very badly wrong even when there's a lot of good conscious intention. There's no shortage of ways that reality can foil a well-intentioned human plan, right? I hope we can admit that, because we're really living in some la-la land if we can't admit that. So that's the nature of the reality that we're in. Not to say that you can't execute a perfect plan perfectly. I mean, in a strict sense, that's probably never true, but in a more or less true way, yes, we also are living in an example where are living in a reality where there are examples of people who execute plans successfully, ones that seem like they defy many odds and succeed. And we love those kinds of stories as human beings. We respond to those sorts of stories innately because it represents, well, one can have at least two views of it. On the one hand, it represents a triumph of the ego over nature. And the ego loves those kinds of stories because it makes the ego feel that it has power and control, which is its job, really, is to try to gain control vis-a-vis itself, its environment, both psychological, social, and physical, spatial. And so it loves to hear stories that it can think are about it doing its good job. But there's also a higher level. I don't mean necessarily that by higher to imply better. I just mean it seems to be at a higher integrative level in the system. It's a literally a higher order process that, at least in some way, that's part of what it is, it seems to me. And that view would view it differently. It would say that such stories are an example of the, not so much of the ego's triumph over nature, but of the unfolding presence of divinity in this reality. It's us. If you go looking for the divine too far away from the human, you're playing a trick on yourself. On the other hand, it's so radically other than the human, considered in this egoic sense, that it remains a useful thing to say that the self is alien, is other. But it's also it's the paradox of it, it's also very deeply us. The center and the circumference. The circumference is the environmental boundary, and the center is the sense of ownership of this particular point of meet in this radius of awareness that I have. You know, the self exists both at the perimeter and in the center, because it's that which stands beyond or above my individual ego experience. But it also includes me in the whole that it constitutes. And therefore it is me. And it is us, collectively. And so I remain committed to this vision, you see, of the big man, big human. The collective soul, as it were, the world soul. I think this has meaning that will someday receive some very precise kind of meaning, of the sort the left hemisphere enjoys. But for now remains something that can be known in experience. It's problem with experiential proofs. Sorry, just a little aside here. It's so lossy going from your experience of something to a compressed linguistic representation of it. And furthermore, you're always every individual is always working kind of double duty to try to convince someone else, because everyone privileges the reality of their own experience. And that's true in like multiple ways, like, because you can try to communicate something to someone, and they might have a reality construction that is diametrically opposed to yours in some way. And so what you're saying is going to hit them in this very inverted way, and they're going to be very unlikely to want to consider that your frame might also have precisely a kind of symmetrically arranged truth on which their truth is in fact secretly dependent. Wow, egos hate that because it instantly levels the playing field. And the thing about any of these things is that too can just become a game and a way of avoiding truth. Because not everything is completely... There are shared realities that exist between people, that exist between all people, that people then try to deny by saying, hey, everything's relative. I think there are things that all human beings know instinctually are wrong. I think there's a pre-verbal, instinctual kind of ethics. It's a very brutal one. It's not, it's an old world kind of ethics, but it's emotionally active and instinctual, and I don't think you learn it. I think it was learned by the race, as it were, by the human race, through the aeons, and so we just inherit it. And I think that's, how we deal with those feelings is very culturally controlled, and therefore very controlled by modifiable reality constructs. I just think these things interact. I don't buy either side of the nature versus nurture argument, and no serious scientist does, I don't think, or I hope not anyway, because it's just so clear that there are multiple factors going on when it comes to human beings. Some things are quite ingrained and quite universal, or can be quite individual, but still quite determined somehow at birth through genetic means, etc. Other aspects are completely whimsical, and I don't mean whimsical in the sense of it's not like I mean they're less somehow real or less material in any way. Like, any personality change is a huge deal in a human being. If you know and love human beings, you know that that's true. So especially when people are growing up, we trivialize this and say, oh, they're going through a phase, but a phase of what though? A phase of identity construction. That's a profound and amazing thing that's happening. That, as far as we know, seems to only really happen in human beings. Certainly at this level of subtlety. It just seems to me, though, that identity construction is partially exploratory and partially environmentally controlled and partially perhaps truly stochastic in certain ways. But it's also partially filling in lines that are configured in a deterministic way. Some of those are lines that just exist because you're a human being. There's no such thing as a human being who doesn't experience anger, unless there's something very structurally weird about their brain. Anger happens to be something that I think lateralizes to the left hemisphere. So maybe in weird cases, but in most normally put together brains, we all know what we mean when we're talking about anger, or sadness, or happiness, or compassion. These are things that are universal. It's very strange to deny that and say, hey, things are maximally relative. They're not. Cut the shit. We're all going through the same sufferings, the same struggles, the same, There's such a steadiness to the human condition, from individual to individual, and also through time. Like, socially speaking, looking at different cultures and different civilizations. You just have to squint a little bit to see it's all the same problems all over again and again and again and again. So that's true. But on the other hand, each culture and each individual has a unique configuration of problems or attributes, let's say, that make it also at the same time completely unique. So, these binaries they're always very misleading. You can't think it's one or the other. It's both of these things, usually. That seems to be the rule. Anyway, that's the big alchemical rule. I'm an alchemist, so I more or less believe in those rules, I guess. I was just trying to think, what is the most honest thing I can try to say about the state of affairs on planet Earth in 2020 on the basis of what I understand about planet Earth in the meager 35 years I've spent on it. I mean, I look around and I just see people divided. I don't mean in a conventional way. Obviously, we're all divided from each other. But I mean internally divided. People are split in themselves already. We live in a way that quite encourages that, or at any rate is very happy to allow that situation to exist. It's something that I just never see mentioned, like in mainstream media or whatever. There's no conversation about the degree to which the history of the West is, yes, it's the history of oppression. That's true, of course, because wrapping back around to the front of this video, it is the Black Iron Prison. It is the Blood Pyramid, which is another eternal thing, a thing that human beings have just been dealing with since there have been human beings. We organize socially, and that creates a state of tyranny for every individual. Some degree of tyranny is tolerated in exchange for the safety of the group. I think somehow the whole notion of economics must grow out of the initial kind of pre-economic fundamental social contracts, which are a kind of exchange. Something is given up in trade for something else, and in this case, it's for basic safety in the world, and also for something to do with the relative weakness of the reality generating effect in individuals, and the exponential strength of that effect as the social group multiplies. I think that to be truly an individual means ideally two things. It means, first of all, to recognize that you live in a world of individuals. You are a true individual, and so is everyone else you encounter. And so that means that there is quite a large degree of relativity. We're a stack. Parts are less relative, parts are more relative. But the parts that make us individuals are about the sum total thing, which is a unique statement. Yes, there are certain lines that are always going to be there, certain shapes that are always going to be there, dynamics that will always be there, etc., whatever resolution of this pretend model you want to think about. But at the same time, there are going to be novelties. There are going to be unique convergence effects that happen when just certain properties are combined in a person or a thing or a place or a society or a piece of music and that's incredible. And so when you realize how incredible that really is, you will immerse in your almost paradoxically maybe in your individuality even more so, and you will let the radiance of that reality making diamond that is your uniqueness, your unique perspective, you will take it more and more as this beautiful divine experience and recognize it that way. getting to that position where you can see that, where you can love yourself enough to truly love others, or vice versa, or are they just the same? Once you get there, you'll see it all is kind of the same from up there. There is no real distinction between loving oneself and loving the other. It appears that way in the playing field, in the arena. And that has its own reality. Sometimes things are zero-sum games. In the end, you're an animal, and you must prioritize yourself. And that, too, you will come to see as part of the divine game. There is both. We are both. But it can't be acknowledged. The history of the West is the history of repression, because the repression must remain effective for the Black Iron Prison to exist. This is something we've been sort of talking about repetitively now on the channel. The ways in which the blood pyramid must remain invisible in order to remain functional. And so there's just no way, really, that this society on the whole is going to encourage people to individuate. Because it just amounts to saying this. It's just what I was trying to describe anyway, that if I don't believe very much in myself, and I don't understand yet that I am a piece of God, I'm going to be very susceptible to strong external personalities and movements and ideas and images that I think, unlike me, are of God. And it doesn't matter if you're conceptualizing of that in secular terms to yourself. It doesn't matter if you don't think it has anything to do with God. It can just be some celebrity that you look up to and that you then tell yourself, but I could never do what that person's doing. And maybe that's true, there are like athletes I admire that I know I would never be able to, but I don't have like a strong inner desire to be an athlete in that way. In an abstract way, you might think, wouldn't it be awesome if I was a really talented, amazing, whatever it is, like surgeon, Yeah, that would be awesome. But it's not like, it's not what I am actually. And maybe I could, and people can run into all kinds of weird problems. Like maybe there's something you're very good at, but you don't actually like doing it. Maybe there's something that you really like, but you're just no good at it. And these are all things like obviously human beings have to figure out as they grow up and define their identities. For some people that seems to be a little more confusing than for others. I'm not sure exactly why. I think for me it's been like a combination of being pretty good at a wide number of things, and also, like everyone else in this time, very split from my internal intuition. It makes a recipe for a lot of false starts, But I do think it happens all the time that people have a desire to be something, and then life happens in a way that sends them a very strong message saying, it's not just that you can't do this, it's you're not good enough to do this. You're just not good enough. Sometimes that can be true in certain ways. But very often it's not true, or at least can't be known to be true at the outset. That's something that people should learn. They should try something and see if they fail or not. And generally you want to try to support people even if they fail a few times, because sometimes, like we've just all seen examples probably, and also in our own lives, of like sometimes you have to fail a few times, but then you get the knack. Sometimes even the best people had a really bad start, So you don't know, and it's incorrect to assume things about the future that you don't know. it's bad if people get discouraged just because of any reason. Very often it's the result of unconscious or conscious kind of trauma passage, from one person or groups of people onto another person. Someone's own bitterness and resentment, blah, blah, blah. So they shame their child out of even trying to dare to think about being a this or that, because maybe the thing they want to be is situated in the shadow of this parent's trauma or whatever the situation is, etc. Very often I think it happens that way, and then people split that desire, which was for themselves, off into an object of desire. If you wanted to be a surgeon, sticking with our example, and something about your life made it impossible for you to think you could ever be that. And again, maybe that's true, maybe it isn't, but the point is you can't know now because you never tried. Maybe you're very unhappy about that. You might become very bitter about it, but another thing you might do is you might start to kind of romanticize and idealize surgeons and doctors. You might seek out relationships with surgeons or things like that, to try to get it that way. That's not such a good thing to be doing in a certain way. In another way, it's an excellent thing to be doing. By living through those experiences, you might learn to break out of them. But one of the things you'll probably learn is that it's not so good for the people you're interacting with either, of course, because you're interacting with a projection of yourself still. You've selected them for some series of traits that represent these aspects of you that you've cast off and can't own in yourself. Look, there are stages of romantic love in which that's the whole thing of it. It's just projections interacting. And in the various stages of life, those kinds of relationships are more or less the norm. And all that's appropriate and fine. I don't mean to issue any kind of very often I think with this Jungian stuff, it still comes across like it's sort of pronouncements or something, like you should have less projections or you should have more projections, or nobody knows enough about how this stuff works to know anything about that. Sorry. Projection is a strange, ambiguous issue. There are many situations in which projecting is obviously bad and you want to do less of it. There are many situations in which you might need to project a little more. And we don't talk so much about that because that would be encouraging creative thought, which is a no-no in most blood pyramids, even the ones that pretend like they want to encourage it, like ours. Well, so that's just it, really. All of this has just been trying to describe that if you're a person like that, you're going to try to invest in others and invest ultimately in the group. And it doesn't have to be the result of trauma. It's just a fundamental issue to do with human beings. Like, we feel the reality defining pressure of groups very, very strongly. That's built into how we make sense of reality. Because it's just a very good check. If everyone else thinks something, maybe you should think it too. It's hard to avoid, that's how we're wired. And there's a relief that comes from investing in the reality consensus of the group, because it means you don't have to examine things on first principles anymore. There's no such thing as examining the first principles. Those come from God in the holy book or whatever. Don't look at it. That's how most paradigms tend to work, even the ones that are secular. Because the truth is, it's such a ridiculous notion. Like, people come in religious types and secular types, and they find their place in the world. There's no such thing as a secular person or a religious person. There are people that are susceptible to different sorts of influences in themselves and in their environments. The secular exudes a particular sort of attraction. The religious exudes a particular sort of attraction. Like most things that people vehemently deny having anything to do with, it's an overcompensation. Everybody has a bit of a religious nature. Again, it's just part of being a monkey. Sorry, it's how we are. We worship stuff. If we don't worship a god in the sky, we're worshiping, a big abstract thing like the dollar. But it's worship just the same. Which is to say that there are points that we define in our model networks that we just kind of categorically say basically like cannot be considered as dynamic or modifiable or falsifiable. And it doesn't really matter to me anyway how many kind of meta levels you push that back. Like in the Western rationalist tradition, it's often said like, well, it's the method itself. The scientific method has been proven to elucidate truth and etc. I mean, serious scientists don't say things like that because they have some kind of ontological foundation for the way they think about the world, or have at least considered these sorts of metaphysical problems. But sort of internet atheist warriors and so on will say things like that. And it's just hysterical because they're just exemplifying the thing that they say they have nothing to do with, which is this kind of religious ideation. But this kind of religious ideation is about the need to naturalize particular approaches to the real and perspectives on the real. It just kind of misses, first of all, it misses the whole way in which people learn and understand reality. Because these people think that they can just kind of proselytize and like educate people out of whatever the argument is, like just shut up and accept the divine truth of the of the scientific method. Of course, they wouldn't put it that way, but that's the energy behind it. But no, that isn't what people should do. People should start from what they can know philosophically, phenomenologically, actually, precisely, and try to make some reasonable sort of extensions from there. And no reasonable person is going to look at the scientific method and say that it isn't an amazing thing that produces amazing results. Look at it. It works really well. But I think there's another truth that's a little subtler and harder to see, which is that just because it works well doesn't mean it's the only thing that works. And it doesn't mean that it exhausts what there is to know. What can be known with the scientific method can be known with the scientific method. That's basically what it comes down to. There may be other things to know, however. And indeed, I am a person who would say it's more than a maybe. I would say any reasonable person looking at the occult would come away with the impression that there's something to know there. Something is working there in the sense that there's a shared understanding that exists between people and groups and etc. The fact that communication is possible about a topic is evidence of its objective status in this particular hard kind of sense of objectivity that I often use on the channel, which it would include notions about objective fantasy, etc. I use it really in the Jungian way. Things are objective if they are present in your experience in a persistent way that is not modifiable directly by consciousness. That means they're objective. They could be objective subjectivities. Or they could be objective objectivities in the sense that if multiple people can encounter something in their experience that they can describe and they can agree, it seems like we've encountered the same or a similar thing, then that's really great evidence of its objectivity, even if it's still in a purely mental domain. There is just way too much, I think I said this even the last time, like way too much confusion about this kind of persistent conflation of the objective and the subjective with like the mental and the material. That's an ancient Cartesian weirdness that is really no longer serving us. I don't know if it ought to be discarded because there are things in experience that lead to viewing that split in that way, and there is such a distinction. But there are subtleties here that extended meditation, essentially, on the phenomenological arena reveal. And it just becomes very clear very quickly, if you're doing deeper alchemical work, that it's not so simple, this objective-subjective situation, because there are things that can come at you objectively from other parts of yourself, because you're not a monolithic identity as far as you know as an ego. As far as you know as an ego, you're a thing that, for instance, has to contend with the reality of dreams. And what are dreams to you? Dreams are thought of by our society as being maximally subjective, but they're like one of the least subjective things. If you're an ego, which we all are, all of us just have the experience of losing consciousness at the end of every day, and then these weird realities transpiring. That's an objective thing that's happening to you. You know, and the content of it is objective relative to you too, because you didn't make it consciously, something else did. Because there still isn't a good acknowledgement about that basic phenomenological situation, that you exist in an experiential arena that contains others. For instance, dream characters, but also I tend to think of many aspects of my experience that way. Emotions are that way. They bubble up from somewhere else and then they flood you, they overwhelm you, and it can be very hard to control them. You can't say that about a thing that you have complete identity with. There's no such thing as it's hard to control it if it is identical with you. The fact that it's hard to control means that it has an autonomy, don't you see? So that's just how it is as human beings. We are a whole that is constructed of many autonomous parts. And the ego is just one of those parts. And it's the part that we identify with, normally. That's how we're built. The ego contains the identity, the locus of identity, you know. Talking about these things with this ridiculous language, because we're in the dark ages of understanding ourselves. That's obvious. We're still all just grappling with the visions that this thing can offer to us about itself to help us understand the whole situation. Most of what it means to be an alchemist just is about taking that seriously. Taking seriously the idea that your self, what you are as a psyche, is mysterious, and that you're a tiny piece of a much bigger machine, but that machine might know things about you that you don't know, and that if you could learn how to address it and learn to listen to it, which is you, it contains you, but is also not you. If you can learn to listen to that thing, maybe you could exist in greater sympathy with it, and thereby realize your destiny in a much more expedient kind of way. That would be the idea, I guess. So the truest thing I can say about this society is that, like all other blood pyramids before it, it prevents people from achieving these subtler degrees of understanding due to its reliance on repression to maintain power. And so that's a really critical problem with this way of life, with the Black Iron Prison. I wish there was some way of pushing this issue more to the center of the conversation. Right now I think there's, and this is part of the problem always in these blood pyramids, there's so much direct pain and strife and suffering that's happening in them that it's very hard for those people who are in those conditions to ever have the space to jump back and really see the degree to which they've been spiritually colonized by the society. That happens after a certain threshold of suffering is reached, I think. There is definitely, people who are very, very badly abused and marginalized by these systems don't have really any illusions about this stuff, obviously. They know what the blood pyramid is, and they know everyone else is living in a dream world. the dream world of the collective that is just such an obvious dream. It needs some people that will poke holes in it. And so like comedians and things like that are very important. They pop those little consensus reality bubbles in a way that people are very... if you do it with a joke, you get to kind of have your cake and eat it. It's funny, but then, people are having dangerous thoughts all of a sudden. How to move forward in such a situation, it's never been figured out. What happens is the blood pyramid goes through its natural life cycle. When it dies, it's actually just going into this sort of cocoon state from which it's going to emerge again in a new form. Whatever the next society is, it's going to be another blood pyramid. It's a race of awareness. Are enough people in the blood pyramid going to snap out of the consensus reality in time to not only sort of do something about the collapse of the blood pyramid, but also to actually transmute that blood pyramid into something different, something better? The reality issue, I just think, is critical, because that underlies really the whole mechanism of it, as far as I can tell. Blood pyramids are popular because they create a reality in which people don't have to feel guilty about abusing other people when those people are beneath them in the hierarchy. And because that particular game of abusing people beneath you in a hierarchy is such an instinctual, vampiric aspect of human beings, that fundamental promise, that's really the promise of the society. If you conform to the society and exist in it in such a way that you don't challenge its reality constructs too much, it will give you this privilege. It will let you abuse anyone who exists outside of that construct. Nobody wants to acknowledge that, really, that's kind of the motivating glue of the thing, but it has been in human history, and it is in this society, certainly. You see why the naturalization of it is so important to this system. It has to be the divine law you can't ever look at or challenge, because that's the only way to really diffuse the guilt enough. So the codification of the thing into the stone tablets that can never be changed, that come from on high, is the same as the fundamental repressive mechanism that is also the same as the belief in the reality construction. Monster Squad has it. It has it all there in the opening, with the reading of the text and the jewel and all of that business. We didn't make the hierarchy. It came from the thing. So, kill the infidels. They're beneath you on the hierarchy, more or less. And the thing about it, and part of what makes it so popular also, is that there is a truth in it that is acknowledged in it, again in this half-concealed way, half-repressed way. But there is a truth about some of these hierarchies, that they are kind of that way. They do just come from nature somehow, It's a very unpopular thing to admit or recognize, but human sexual attraction is largely that way. People are attracted to very particular sorts of physical features. And, it's attraction is a reflection of your identity. So it's just the same kind of picture I've been painting over and over again. There are aspects of it that are very fixed, and aspects that are more individualized, and then aspects that are more dynamic. So like the fixed aspects would be like everyone's attracted to facial symmetry. Everyone. Welcome to having a visual system that prefers patterns and ratios and etc. It just prefers symmetries, generally speaking, and it prefers them in faces. Other things that are less low level than that, but still outside of the realm of conscious modulation, or outside the realm of just genetic modulation, like things that just apply to all people, or like, like a strong jawline in men, or particular softness in the eyes on women. These are things that signal attraction and are very, very universal. The people who don't respond to such things are outliers, psychopaths, etc. Most people, I'm joking a little bit there, but most people are wired in that way. And so there's nothing individual or subjective about that hierarchy of attraction. People either have those properties or they don't, and that makes them more or less attractive to the vast majority of people in a way that's actually pretty predictable, looked at as a statistical reality. On the other hand, there are very particular details that individuals are going to be attracted to, and some of those aren't conscious. Some of those are going to be set up really early on in your life, and maybe even before birth. But certainly things like, you're going to be attracted to the faces of people that remind you of other faces of other people that you had positive experiences with before. And you're going to just have peculiar aesthetic interests that are maybe half symbolic in nature, or who knows what, maybe just arbitrary, but they're going to be particular to you and not modifiable. Like, I can't help it. There's a particular eyebrow shape that I'm very attracted to, in men and women, but particularly in women. And that's just what it is. It's not, I didn't decide to be attracted to it, or etc. There are other things where, and we all know that people's tastes can change, though, as they grow and go through different phases of life. That's true with anything aesthetic that you are appreciating, whether that's art or music, or indeed the art that is another human being. And so it's all this stuff all together always. The blood pyramid is perhaps not very good at recognizing those subtler aspects. It's founded on the power it can wield that comes as a result of one of the more universal and unmodifiable hierarchical structures, though, which is the capacity to wield violence, which is also why the society as a whole has skewed in a patriarchal way. Men wield violence better, and because that's the fundamental way that societies are born and happen in the world, is that, the group has to establish its authority through violence. And so the hierarchies that dictate the efficacy of violence are not always this way, but are very often, and are in a fundamental way, I would argue, of a transcendental nature. Sorting out what constitutes a properly transcendental hierarchy versus what is a more socially constructed or individually constructed hierarchy is non-trivial. And people who blast around with language as if they know what all these things are already are just not thinking lucidly about the issue, in my view. The trouble of these hierarchies and the oppressions that they create is precisely because they're so complex and intersectional, and traverse so many subtle domains of human psychological and social realities and experience. If we can't acknowledge that, we're underestimating the enemy, don't you see? How are we going to escape from the bondage of these things if we continue to... I almost think really that the continued insistence on reducing every hierarchy to a social construction is a kind of shouting at the sky, like, I won't accept the dismalness of the actual situation kind of reaction, If only that were the case. If hierarchies were purely the result of social construction, they would be much more easy to dismantle, and the problem is therefore less scary, and we have more control over it. Some of these hierarchies are very sticky. They're lodged in our nature, and that makes the problem very tricky. And I don't say that with any intention of saying, therefore, get along with these hierarchies. Maybe. I don't know what the answer is to it. I just know that I'm very bothered by it. So, we need much more honest thinking about these issues, though. Thinking that isn't coming from a place of terror, which is it's the instrument of repression in many cases. It's, the society capitalizes on your fear to encourage all of this repression. We all need to wake up and realize what a deep, deep problem we're in collectively. It's tricky. This is a very tricky problem to find our way out of, because it has aspects of this kind of a non-binary sort of solution is required, because we have to develop a more realistic view of ourselves, and that requires a double acknowledgement. It requires an acknowledgement that things are much more relative than most people behave as if were the case. There is a lot of difference between people's reality bubbles. And it is a sign of a mature society that it should become more and more tolerant of the differences and the subtle differences that exist between people's perceptions of the world. However, it must also be acknowledged that if these conceptions of the world drift too far apart, there's no possibility of group coherence, and anarchy ensues. And furthermore, that there is such a thing as a universal common ground in the species, around which these reality conceptions ought to orbit with some degree of effective mapping. You see, I don't want to argue a centrist sort of position, because I don't think it's a matter of just crossfading between these two things. It's going to require something much more particular, which is a new idea somehow that will transcend these first two. That's harder than just saying, a little of this, a little of that. Well, yeah, but the whole issue is you put these two things together, there are all these contradictions. How do you resolve them then? If you don't resolve them, the social fabric deteriorates. But you see, right now we just have people kind of running in opposite directions. You have people that are running more and more in the direction of, just give me a blood pyramid that tells me what to do, please, and lets me get my pleasures where I can, according to the morality of the pyramid. And so that's the instinct towards more control, more rules, more use of violence to enforce the way of life and return to the supposed perfect functioning of the way of life before all these rotten influences got into it, etc. You have people running very hard in that direction. And on the other hand, you have people running very far in the direction of we don't need a police force at all. Abolish the whole thing. And wouldn't it be great, actually, if we just didn't even have a government, probably, and free everything for everybody, and etc. And that's... I'm sorry, but I've seen firsthand in my life, both as a child and then again recently, the evil that can flourish in chaos. Regulation, oversight, control of the social sort is necessary. So there's no easy run to the safe base like approach to this problem. We need government. We need society, but we need one that works, obviously. It turns out that's hard. It's hard to make one that works over the long range for enough people to avoid these basic instabilities. The blood pyramid is a very stable structure, but its stability occurs over a long range. That's part of what gives it its stability is that it's learned how to die and rise again. The blood pyramid on some level knows, it knows that it's gonna collapse. That's just built into its life cycle. In truth, it's like a thing, like a lizard shedding its skin or something. It's just gonna come right back again. It's the same thing. And you can see the approach in macrocosm when you look at the way that companies are often run, particularly like startup companies sometimes. The approach is kind of move in, build up as much profit as you can, as quickly as you can, and not think at all about the long range implications of anything that you're doing, because you don't care if the thing is going to collapse in 10 years. You just want your money now, build it up and sell it, and then it's someone else's problem. And then everyone who buys it does the same thing. They just come in and they say, okay, here are all these problems. Just nuke this, pump all this up now. Oh, there we go, got a bunch of money again, and then sell it again at a profit. But every time that happens, and also you can see this in the universities, like universities are the same way. These like, the deans and presidents and so on, they come in, they're no longer affiliated really with the actual academic staff or faculty in any way. It's just career managers and so on. They come in, they focus on things that are really popular and push up profits in the short term. Then they move on to the next institution, and they've left behind a whole bunch of lingering structural problems that no one thought about because it didn't matter for the short-term maximization. That becomes the problem of the next people that come in. But what they tend to do is just say, oh, ignore those problems. Yeah, we're working on it. It takes time. Here are a few steps we've done. And then they just go on to make a whole bunch of new problems according to their new cost bumping, and the cycle repeats. And over time, the institution as a whole degrades as a result of this growing collection of problems that has to be increasingly repressed and shoved off into this infinity vortex of sunken costs or something. I don't know how to put it. And so that's how it is with a lot of businesses. It's how it is, unfortunately, now with the education system. It's how it is with the entire society. The whole society is doing that. Eventually it's going to collapse, but it doesn't matter. The people who are at the top of it have contingency plans. They'll just float away into some other place and get working on the next big blood pyramid they can, start at the top of and therefore benefit the most from. Again, it's important to realize that blood pyramids they're not built by individual people or little cabals of people conspiring to control the rest of us. The blood pyramids happen as an organic process, as a result of every individual's behavior. Once it's happening, there are people who have learned really well how to exploit it, basically, and just play by its bloody rules, which are the true rules of the society, and maximize their immediate success within that society, which then gives them enough, which then peculiarly positions them in a little bit of way outside of the society. But it's a complicated interaction of factors, this blood pyramid stuff. And again, we're not gonna figure out how to overcome it if we keep imagining that it's some evil wizard or little group of evil people controlling the whole blood pyramid. Yeah, there's such a thing. There's the top of the blood pyramid, and you'll find particular things up there, and a whole bunch of the reality manufacturing and so on takes place there, and it's very Wizard of Oz. I don't mean to deny that for a minute, but the actual control that little top has is actually very, very small. It's just the impression of its control and authority that gives it its power. That's why part of why the police have to look so scary now. The truth is that the whole I mean, even with the superior technology and so on, if the entire country really turned on the power structure, it would only be a matter of time. It's just a matter of bodies. It's another thing that it's like the blood pyramid knows but has to repress. Well, so anyway, at this point, I feel like I'm just sort of ambiently narrating things about blood pyramids and how useful it is. I've been talking for about an hour. I'm hungry and thirsty, so I'm going to go take care of my body, and I will see you in the future. Bye.